They say every award show has a moment no one forgets. But no one expected this moment to happen before the lights even came up. Picture it. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. A polished backstage corridor at the 53rd International Emmy Awards. Quiet, controlled, routine. And then suddenly, everything changes. A whisper, a glance, a name traveling through the room like a spark hitting dry grass. Meghan is here. Not scheduled, not announced, not expected by anyone in the building. Let me ask you something right now. Have you ever been in a room where the energy shifts before anyone even speaks? Because that's what happened. 1 second, crew members were adjusting cue cards and checking microphones. The next, a stage manager froze mid-sentence, eyes locked on the monitor, as if they'd just seen something they weren't prepared to handle. Why? No one would say. Not yet. And that's where this story truly begins. Not in the spotlight, but in the shadows of an event built on precision, timing, and iron-tight guest lists. Now here's the question that keeps echoing online. How does someone end up at an international award ceremony without being on the official list? Was it an invitation that got lost? A misunderstanding? Or something else entirely? Hold that thought, because before anyone could make sense of what was happening, the two people responsible for keeping the night running smoothly, Ripa and Mark Consuelos, were already being pulled into a situation they never signed up for. And here's the part no one could have predicted. Kelly didn't react right away. She didn't panic. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even move. She just watched, like someone waiting to confirm whether the storm was headed straight for them, or whether it would pass quietly on its own. But storms like this don't pass quietly, do they? Especially not in a room full of cameras, publicists, executives, and reputations that cannot afford surprises. Let's back up for 1 second, not to explain, but to deepen the mystery. The 53rd International Emmys wasn't just another glamorous night. It was a cultural pressure point. New faces, new networks, global scrutiny. A year where every headline mattered. A year when the industry was already exhausted by drama, shifting loyalties, and the constant question, who deserves the spotlight? And who is forcing their way into it? So why this night? Why this moment? Why her? Some attendees claimed they thought it was a publicity stunt. Others insisted it was a misunderstanding. A few said nothing at all, because saying the wrong thing in a room like that can end careers. But here's the strangest part. No official announcement was made. No cameras turned toward the unexpected arrival. No staff member stepped forward to acknowledge her presence. Instead, there was silence. The kind of silence that tells you something is very, very wrong. And then it happened. Kelly leaned toward a nearby production assistant. Not dramatically, not angrily, just calmly, too calmly. A quiet instruction, a subtle hand gesture, the kind that only means one thing in live television. Handle this. Now. But what did the assistant hear? What exact words were spoken? No one agrees. Some say Kelly asked for confirmation. Others claim she said 4 words no host ever wants associated with their event. Get security. Right now? But here's the twist you aren't expecting. That moment wasn't the beginning. It was the result of something that had already happened earlier that day. Something almost no one knew about. Something that explains why Kelly didn't look surprised. Only resigned. Because maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the first warning sign. And if that's true, then the real question isn't why security was called. It's why it took so long. But what set all of this in motion is still ahead. And what came next would change everything, and no one in that room saw it coming. But before we get to the moment everything explodes, we need to rewind. Not days, not hours, but just enough to understand the tension simmering beneath the surface. Because this wasn't a night that went wrong. It was a night waiting to go wrong. And everyone in that building felt it, even if they couldn't explain why. Let's step outside the venue for a moment. Across the street, crowds were gathering earlier than usual. Not fans, not paparazzi, just people waiting for something they couldn't name, but somehow expected. Isn't it strange how sometimes energy arrives before the event it belongs to? Some attendees later said they felt a heaviness in the air, like the night was out of balance before it even began. Like the universe had penciled in chaos somewhere on the schedule, no time listed, but inevitable. And inside, the crew felt it too. Lighting technicians double-checked rigs they'd tested all week. Producers hovered closer than usual. A wardrobe stylist muttered that people are acting like something's about to break. But nothing was wrong. Not yet. What no one realized was that the fuse had already been lit hours earlier, quietly, almost invisibly. It started with a rumor. Just a small one. The kind that begins as a casual text. Have you heard who might show up tonight? No name. Just an implication. And isn't it interesting how sometimes the absence of a name is louder than actually saying it? By mid-afternoon, that rumor had traveled farther than any press announcement. From makeup rooms, to green rooms, to the hosting suite. And here's where everything shifts. Someone knocked on Ripa's door. Not a stylist, not a producer, someone higher up. A person who doesn't knock unless something sensitive is unfolding. Kelly's reaction wasn't outrage. It wasn't panic. It was something much more unsettling. She closed her eyes, exhaled slowly, and said only one thing. Please tell me this is a joke. But it wasn't. And that's when the countdown began. Not officially, not verbally, but emotionally. Because when you're hosting a global event, your job is to eliminate surprises, not manage them. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever been responsible for something so public that one unexpected variable could destroy it? Then you understand the pressure. Hosting the International Emmys isn't just reading lines from a teleprompter. It's commanding a room full of CEOs, award winners, and people whose egos enter before their bodies do. It's managing timing, diplomacy, grace, and disaster, all while smiling. So when Kelly received that quiet warning, she didn't overreact. She did something far more powerful. She prepared, and preparation doesn't look dramatic. It looks like calm, which is why no one, not even Mark, knew what she was bracing for. Now, let's shift to the moment the first domino fell. A security staffer stationed at the private entrance noticed something unusual, an unfamiliar arrival with no listed accreditation. Not suspicious, just out of place. Award shows don't run on glamour. They run on lists. If your name isn't on the list, nothing happens for you. Not a badge, not a pass, not a seat. So when someone approached the restricted check-in with confidence instead of credentials, staff hesitated. Not because they recognized the face, but because they recognized the reaction. People suddenly stopping mid-conversation. Phones lowering. Eyes widening. Recognition isn't always verbal. Sometimes the room speaks before anyone opens their mouth. And here's where everything gets even stranger. No one alerted the press. No staff member rushed to the organizers. No alarms were triggered. Instead, the moment was swallowed. As if everyone hoped ignoring it would make it disappear. But ignoring problems has never made them smaller. Has it ever worked for you? Because inside the venue, silence became pressure. A cameraman whispered, "Is that who I think it is?" A production assistant shook their head and said, "Don't get involved." Someone else muttered, "If this goes wrong, I'm not taking the fall." And meanwhile, Kelly was still unaware that the situation had already escalated without her. But let's go deeper. Why was her reaction so controlled later on? Because Ripa isn't new to live television unpredictability. She's dealt with on-air walk-offs, backstage meltdowns, and surprise cancellations. You don't survive decades in daytime TV without developing a sixth sense. And when she finally saw what everyone else had seen minutes earlier, she didn't blink. She understood instantly. Not the why, not the how, just the risk. And risk changes everything, especially when a host's reputation is on the line. Now, what about Mark? People often underestimate him because Kelly is the more visible half of their hosting dynamic. But Mark Consuelos is not passive. He has presence. He has composure. And most importantly, he knows when something is about to explode. So when he noticed Kelly's shoulders tense, not visibly, just slightly, he leaned in and asked, "What's happening?" Kelly didn't answer, not because she didn't know, but because saying it out loud would make it real. And sometimes silence isn't avoidance. It's strategy. Meanwhile, word traveled faster than confirmation. A nominee texted someone at their table, "You're not going to believe who just showed up." A journalist posted a cryptic message online. Unexpected drama brewing at the International Emmys. Stay tuned. No names. Not yet. Just enough oxygen to turn sparks into flames. Inside the venue, seating ushers stalled. Producers adjusted timing. An executive whispered, "If this interrupts the broadcast, heads will roll." Still, no one made the first move, because everyone was waiting for someone else to handle it. And that's how tension becomes dangerous. When responsibility gets passed around like a hot coal, someone's going to get burned. Now, focus on the moment the camera rehearsals paused. A floor manager froze mid-instruction, headset pressed tighter against their ear. Their expression changed from confusion to disbelief, to something close to dread. They didn't speak. They just signaled to the assistant director with a single urgent motion. And that was the exact moment Kelly realized the situation had reached her. She didn't ask what was wrong. She already knew. But here's the detail that matters. She still didn't act. Not instantly. Because the worst decisions are made in panic. And Kelly Ripa does not panic. She calculates. Which is why her calm looked unnerving to the people around her. A calm person in a crisis is either in control or moments away from calling in someone who is. But before we get to that moment, let's consider something. Why was this arrival triggering such a reaction? It wasn't just surprise. It wasn't even personal. It was protocol. Award shows are fortresses, socially and logistically. Even invited guests are tightly managed. So an unexpected presence isn't just inconvenient. It's a breach that can lead to legal issues, security failures, and public relations catastrophes. No event organizer wants to explain why someone appeared who shouldn't have been there. So when Kelly finally leaned toward the production assistant, she wasn't reacting emotionally. She was protecting the broadcast, protecting the event, protecting her role. And that's when she made the quiet decision that would define the night. Not loudly, not dramatically, just with 4 understated words. Take care of this. The assistant nodded and disappeared. But here's where everything flips. The situation didn't get handled. It got worse. Because instead of leaving, the unexpected guest moved deeper into the venue, past the point where staff usually intervene. A single choice changed the trajectory of the night. A choice that forced Kelly and Mark into a position no hosts ever want to be in. A position that would soon demand action. But the action that finally happened isn't the one anyone expected. And what came next would change everything. And no one in that room saw it coming. They say nothing just happens. People don't simply appear at one of the most exclusive award shows in the world by accident. Doors don't open themselves. Security doesn't suddenly forget the rules. Credentials don't magically approve. So the question everyone keeps asking is the one we're starting with right now. How did Meghan end up at the International Emmy Awards in the first place? Let's rewind, not for explanations, but for clarity. Because if you trace the night back to its earliest thread, you'll realize something crucial. This wasn't spontaneous. It was intentional. But intentional doesn't always mean planned successfully. So let's go back to the start of the day. Morning in New York City. Sky overcast. Humidity clinging to the glass buildings like a warning no one hears until later. Inside a quiet hotel lobby in Midtown, a woman stepped out of a private elevator, wearing sunglasses even though she was indoors. No entourage, no flashing cameras, just quiet movement. And that alone was strange, because people who want attention usually arrive loudly. But here's where it gets interesting. Her presence wasn't meant to be loud. It was meant to be noticed quietly. You ever seen someone enter a room not to cause a scene, but to create curiosity? That was the energy. Because sometimes silence is more powerful than drama. Now, let's talk about the rumor. It didn't start online. It didn't come from a leak. It didn't come from an aggressive PR source. It started with one text. Just like most disasters do. Around 11:42 a.m., someone inside the event production team received a message that read, "There's been a change to the guest list. Stand by." No explanation. No name. No official attachment. But here's the problem. Changes don't happen the morning of the International Emmys. They happen weeks ahead. And if they don't happen at all. So that message created the first ripple. But the second text created the wave. This one came from a different contact, around 12:17 p.m., and simply said, "You won't believe who just landed." Still no name. But names weren't needed. Silence speaks. People in the industry don't always say what they mean. They say enough for someone else to fill in the blanks. By early afternoon, 3 different production staff members had heard whispers. Not confirmations, just possibilities. But possibility is the most dangerous fuel. It makes people speculate. It makes people nervous. It makes people behave differently before anything even happens. Now here's another detail most people don't know. Award shows don't operate on one guest list. They operate on 5. The public list. The press-approved list. the internal list, the seating list, and the restricted list. If someone isn't on every single one, they don't get in, not even by accident. So how did this situation begin? Not with a name, not with a request, but with a misunderstanding. At least, that's what the first staff member assumed. Around 2:05 p.m., a junior coordinator received an email marked as urgent. It appeared to come from a well-known agency. The message referenced a last-minute attendance adjustment for a high-profile figure, citing direct authorization. But here's the issue. No one at the event had requested such an adjustment. And authorization doesn't work backward. So the coordinator did the right thing. She forwarded it to her supervisor. But the supervisor didn't respond. Not because they ignored it, because something else was happening at the same time. Something bigger. Let's pause here. Have you ever had two problems land at once, and you only noticed the smaller one when it was too late? That's what happened. The event team was distracted by a major technical issue involving the teleprompter system. Cables, backup feeds, timing delays, everything that can go wrong when the world is watching. So that suspicious email? It sat unanswered. Not rejected. Not approved. Just suspended. And suspended information is where trouble grows. Now, let's move to the arrival itself. This was not a dramatic entrance. No red carpet. No flashing bulbs. No paparazzi screaming questions. Instead, a black car pulled up to the side entrance, the one reserved for VIPs who don't want public attention. The driver stepped out, opened the door. A figure exited with controlled confidence. Not hurried, not hesitant, just deliberate. Security watched closely, not because they recognized her, but because they recognized the behavior. People who belong usually wait for staff. People who don't often assume access. And that might have been the first red flag. A staff member approached and asked for credentials, standard protocol. The response was calm. They should be on file. Should. One word that immediately changes tone. Staff checked the system. Nothing came up, which is where things could have ended, politely, quietly, uneventfully. But they didn't, because the person didn't retreat. Instead, they made a call. A short one. A quiet one. And when they hung up, they said, "You'll want to verify again." Now pause. Who says that unless they believe access is guaranteed? Was it confidence? Was it misunderstanding? Was it assumption? Security didn't know. And uncertainty is dangerous, especially at elite events. So instead of removing her, they contacted a higher-ranking staff member. And this is where the timeline starts to fracture. The higher-ranking supervisor arrived and asked one question. Who approved this? Silence. Because no one had. But here's the unexpected twist. Instead of forcing her to leave, they stalled. Why? Because no one wanted to make the wrong call. High-profile guests create fear. Fear of backlash. Fear of headlines. Fear of consequences. So the supervisor didn't say no. They said, "Give us a moment." And that moment allowed entry past the outer checkpoint. Not fully inside. Not seated. Just close enough for the situation to get complicated. Now let's shift perspective. Backstage, the stage manager didn't yet know what was unfolding. They were focused on timing, rehearsals, and coordinating with Kelly and Mark. But around 4:16 p.m., someone approached and whispered something in their ear. The manager froze, then said only, "You're kidding." But they weren't. The stage manager immediately contacted event operations. And what did operations say? "We're already looking into it." Already, meaning this was no longer a small confusion. It was now a problem with momentum. Meanwhile, word began traveling, not officially, but by observation. An assistant noticed someone unfamiliar in a restricted hallway. A makeup artist texted a coworker. A camera operator overheard something and repeated it without context. And that's how rumors spread, not in full sentences, but in fragments. Now here's something that will surprise you. At this point, Meghan still hadn't broken any rules that would justify removal. She hadn't entered the auditorium. She hadn't interrupted rehearsals. She hadn't demanded access. But perception doesn't wait for facts. Perception decides before confirmation arrives. And perception was already shifting the temperature of the building. One producer reportedly said, "If she's here officially, someone would have warned us." Another replied, "If she's here unofficially, someone needs to handle it fast." But no one moved yet. Why? Because everyone was waiting for clarity. Clarity that wasn't coming. And that brings us to the most crucial part of this chapter. How intention became escalation. At 4:32 p.m., A communication finally reached event organizers from the agency email address that appeared earlier. This time, the message stated that the previous request was internally confirmed. But here's the catch. It still lacked essential verification. No signature, no tracking, no official documentation. It was like receiving a note without a name. Would you trust that? Most people wouldn't. But under pressure, uncertainty becomes influence. Because when someone might be important, staff hesitate. Hesitation leads to delay. Delay leads to vulnerability. And vulnerability leads to consequences. Meanwhile, Kelly was still unaware of the growing issue. She was reviewing her opening segment, adjusting timing with Mark, unaware that an unexpected thread was weaving itself into the night's fabric. But that silence was ending. Because at 4:47 p.m., someone finally told her, "There's a situation. Now let's ask the question directly. Why didn't anyone stop it sooner?" Because in environments like this, no one wants to be the first to act, but everyone wants to avoid being the last. And while staff debated the safest approach, the unexpected presence moved further inside. Still calm, still silent, not disruptive, but undeniably present. And presence changes everything. A single unexpected arrival can shift power, take attention, create uncertainty, disrupt balance, even without saying a word. Now here's where the chapter tightens. Someone inside the building sent a message to a private group chat. "She's here." 3 words. No punctuation. No need. Within minutes, phones buzzed across the venue. People didn't look shocked. They looked alert, like they knew the night had just split into 2 possible futures. One where nothing happened, and one where everything did. The problem was, no one knew which version they were standing in yet. But they were about to. Because at 5:03 p.m., a decision was quietly made, not announced, not written, just silently agreed upon. The situation could no longer be ignored, and the responsibility was about to land on someone who never asked for it. Someone who wasn't part of security. Someone who wasn't part of operations. Someone who wasn't even in the room when it began. It was about to land on the hosts, Kelly and Mark. Because when confusion reaches the top has to decide. And they were minutes away from being pulled into the center of a situation that had already slipped out of everyone else's hands. But here's the final twist of this chapter. The person who alerted Kelly wasn't panicked. They were relieved, because they believed handing the problem upward would make it disappear. They had no idea it was about to become the moment the entire world would soon be whispering about. And what came next would change everything. And no one involved was prepared for the consequences. Ripa didn't flinch. That's the part people can't stop talking about. When the news reached her, not through a dramatic announcement, not through a public confrontation, but through a quiet whisper, her expression didn't change. No raised eyebrows, no sharp inhale, no stunned silence, just a single blink, and then stillness. But let's rewind, because the moment she learned the truth is not where this chapter begins. It begins 10 minutes earlier, when everything still looked normal. Kelly and Mark were standing on stage, reviewing their final rehearsal. The auditorium was empty except for crew members scattered like chess pieces in carefully chosen positions. Lights were being adjusted. Sound checks echoed across the room. Cue cards were being swapped and reprinted. It was the calm before the broadcast. A controlled calm. The kind that makes everyone believe nothing can go wrong because everything has already been planned to perfection. That's the illusion. Award shows are not spontaneous. They are engineered. Every laugh, every pause, every camera angle exists because someone decided it should. So when Kelly and Mark stood under the lights, reading through the opening monologue, they were not thinking about surprises. They were thinking about timing, delivery, rhythm. Mark leaned over and whispered something, and Kelly laughed, not loudly, but with relaxed ease. It was the kind of moment that tells you 2 people feel in control. But control is a fragile thing, and it takes only one intrusion to break it. Now let's shift to the exact moment the first disruption rippled backstage. A production assistant, young, nervous, headset slightly too large, was handed a message. Not a phone, not a printed alert, just a verbal instruction from someone higher up. "Find Kelly." Quietly, the assistant's stomach dropped. Messages like that are never about something small. They aren't about a missing prop or a timing shift. They're about the kind of issue no one wants to be responsible for delivering. The assistant walked toward the stage, heart pounding in their ears louder than the audio test playing overhead. But Kelly was still mid-rehearsal. So the assistant waited and waited, hands clasped behind their back, pretending to look relaxed. But they weren't. Nervousness leaks through the body, in posture, in breathing, in eyes that won't stay still. Mark noticed first. He paused his line and looked directly at the assistant. Everything okay? The assistant swallowed hard. Yes. No. Kind of. Kelly lowered her cue card slowly. What's happening? But the assistant couldn't answer yet, not in front of everyone. So they leaned in and whispered something so quietly that even the audio engineer couldn't catch a single word. Kelly's reaction? A blink. Not shock. Not confusion. Just a calm acknowledgement that something unwelcome had just entered her world. Mark's reaction was different. His jaw tightened, not dramatically, but noticeably. He didn't speak. He waited. Because some people react to news with noise. Others react with stillness. And Mark was the second kind. Kelly handed her cue card to a nearby crew member. We're taking 5. She said it casually, as if nothing important was happening. But everyone felt the energy shift. Crew members exchanged glances. Lighting froze mid-adjustment. Silence stretched across the stage like a held breath. Kelly stepped off the platform and walked toward the assistant. Tell me again. This time, the assistant spoke more clearly, still quiet, but clear enough. Kelly listened, not interrupting, not reacting outwardly, just absorbing. Then she exhaled once. Not sharply, just enough to release the air she suddenly didn't need. Mark approached. What's going on? Kelly didn't answer immediately. That hesitation told him more than words could have. He frowned slightly. Who told you? The assistant gave a name. A senior operations manager. Not someone who jumps at shadows. Not someone who makes mistakes. Kelly nodded. Okay. That single word did not mean acceptance. It meant decision. Because Kelly Ripa has hosted through chaos before. Teleprompter failures. Unexpected walk-offs. Guests who changed segments at the last second. Crisis is not new to her. But this was different. This wasn't a technical issue. This was a presence. And presence is harder to remove than a malfunction. Let's pause here. Have you ever been responsible for an entire room and suddenly realized someone else now controls the energy in it? That's what Kelly felt. Not fear, but displacement. And displacement makes even professionals uneasy. Mark noticed the mental shift before anyone else did. He stepped slightly closer, not protectively, but in alignment. A subtle but intentional gesture. Partners who have worked together long enough don't need words. They read shoulders. Breathing. Silence. He leaned in. What do you need? Kelly shook her head. Not yet. That answer wasn't dismissal. It was strategy. Kelly didn't move impulsively because impulsive actions lead to public consequences. Instead, she started gathering information. Who saw her? Where is she now? How far into the venue did she get? But none of those answers came immediately. Because information inside a live event travels slowly, and speculation travels fast. Meanwhile, word was spreading backstage, not in full sentences, but in fragments. She's here. Did someone approve this? Is she presenting? No one knows. Kelly knew she had limited time before rumors became reactions. So she did something unexpected. She returned to rehearsal. Not because she was unaffected, but because abandoning routine would draw attention. And attention makes problems bigger. Mark followed her lead. But his focus was different now. He read the room. He watched the crew. He scanned the balcony. Not for danger. For disruption. Because sometimes the most powerful thing in a room isn't noise. It's anticipation. Now let's go to the moment everything tightened. A stage manager approached Kelly with a tablet in hand. We have a complication. Kelly didn't sigh. Didn't roll her eyes. Didn't show tension. What kind? The manager hesitated. She's not leaving. Not leaving. 2 words that changed everything. Kelly stood still. Mark's eyebrows raised slightly, but again, no panic. Who spoke to her? Security. And she said she was waiting for someone. Waiting. That word is never simple. People waiting inside restricted access zones aren't passive. They're expecting movement. Expecting a result. Expecting someone to let them through. Kelly asked the next logical question. Waiting for who? No answer. Not because the manager didn't know, but because the manager hadn't been told. That gap, between what is known and what is assumed, is where chaos grows. Kelly took a slow breath. Her voice stayed level. Okay, We're not escalating this. Not escalating. Important phrase. Escalation creates headlines. Escalation creates witnesses. Escalation turns a small situation into a public one. But the problem wasn't shrinking. It was expanding. Because people weren't just noticing. They were choosing sides. Some staff whispered, "Maybe it's fine. Maybe someone forgot to update the list." Others whispered, "If we handle this wrong, we'll all be blamed." Fear divides teams faster than facts unite them. Mark stepped in. "Has anyone verified authorization?" The stage manager shook their head. "Not fully. Not fully means nothing. Not fully means unknown." Mark nodded slowly. "Okay, we need clarity before action." But clarity wasn't coming. Because while Kelly and Mark were trying to control the situation from the stage, something else was happening behind them. Someone had already reached out to an outside contact. Someone who wasn't connected to the event. Someone who now knew what was unfolding inside the building, before Kelly had even processed it. And that was the moment the story began slipping out of internal control. Now let's shift to the emotional core of this chapter. Kelly isn't someone who reacts dramatically to discomfort. She reacts logically. But logic has limits when information is incomplete. Every second she stayed on stage, her mind was running two scripts. The one she was rehearsing, and the one unfolding behind her. Mark sensed the divide. He leaned in between lines and whispered, "Talk to me." Kelly's answer was quiet. "Not yet." Those two words told Mark everything. She didn't have enough information to respond. And acting without information is the fastest path to disaster. So Mark changed tactics. He positioned himself slightly forward on stage, not to lead, but to shield. Not physically, socially. Hosts don't just guide shows. They set tone. If Kelly looked unsettled, the room would dissolve. So Mark kept the energy steady. Light banter, calm presence, controlled pacing. Meanwhile, Kelly's thoughts were accelerating. Why here? Why now? Why this event? Because timing matters. Uninvited appearances don't happen randomly. They happen deliberately. Now let's widen the frame. While Kelly and Mark held the stage, the building itself was shifting into quiet lockdown. Security was repositioned. Access points were tightened. Communication channels narrowed. But here's the twist. No official decision had been made yet. Everyone was preparing for an outcome that hadn't been chosen. It was like watching a storm roll in without knowing whether it would hit or pass. And Kelly was standing in the center of it. Then came the turning point of this chapter. A second message reached the stage manager. This time, not whispered, delivered, printed. The note was handed to Kelly. She unfolded it. Read it. Her expression didn't change, but the silence around her did. Mark watched her carefully. "Well?" Kelly exhaled very slowly. "They're asking us to intervene. Us. Not security. Not operations. Not event directors. The hosts. That is never a good sign." Mark stepped closer. "Why us?" Kelly looked at him. "Because they think she'll listen." In that moment, the situation transformed from a logistical problem into a personal one. If the hosts were now expected to make contact, the stakes were no longer procedural. They were reputational. Kelly folded the note and handed it back. "We're not doing that." "Not yet." Mark nodded. Agreed. But refusing wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Because when a request is denied, pressure doesn't disappear. It transfers. And now the pressure was heading straight toward the decision-makers at the highest level. But the next request wouldn't be a suggestion. It would be a demand. One that would force Kelly and Mark into a situation no hosts ever want to face. Especially not minutes before the cameras go live. And what came next would change everything. And no one on that stage was prepared for the fallout. The audience noticed first. Not security. Not producers. Not even Kelly and Mark. It was the people already seated inside the auditorium. The nominees, the executives, the invited guests, who picked up on the shift before anyone backstage fully understood what was unfolding. And that in itself is strange. Because audiences aren't supposed to know when something is wrong. Award shows are designed to hide chaos, not reveal it. But on this night, the room felt it before the event even began. Let's go back to the moment the theater doors opened for early seating. Rows of perfectly polished chairs. Soft music playing overhead. Event staff guiding guests with practiced smiles. Everything looked normal. But normal is fragile. And it broke almost instantly. The first sign wasn't loud. It was subtle. A ripple instead of a wave. A nominee in the third row leaned toward their spouse, and whispered something while pretending to read the program. The spouse looked up, not startled, but confused. Then they looked over their shoulder. Not casually, intentionally. Their eyes tracked across the room as if searching for confirmation. But confirmation didn't come, not yet. Across the aisle, a director paused mid-sentence as someone slid into a seat one row behind them. The director's face shifted, first recognition, then disbelief, then something close to discomfort. But the director didn't speak. They just sat back slowly, folding their arms as if settling in for something they wished they weren't about to witness. It took less than 30 seconds for the room's energy to change. Not dramatically, not visibly, quietly, like oxygen thinning without warning. Guests exchanged glances instead of greetings. Conversations grew shorter. Laughter faded into fragments that didn't land. Award shows thrive on confidence. People walk in wanting to be seen. But on this night, people suddenly wanted to disappear into their seats. Let's pause here. Have you ever been somewhere when the atmosphere dropped without explanation? When the room felt colder, even though nothing physically changed? That's what happened. No announcement. No disruption. Just awareness. Because people don't always react to events. Sometimes they react to possibilities. Now here's where things get even stranger. Most people inside the auditorium didn't even know what they were reacting to. They only knew that other people were reacting. And that's how tension spreads. Not through information, but through observation. A journalist seated near the aisle texted their editor. Something feels off here. The editor replied instantly. Off how? The journalist typed back. Not sure. People are whispering. No names. No details. Just atmosphere. And sometimes atmosphere is enough. In the balcony seating, a television executive stopped mid-laugh as their phone buzzed. They glanced at the screen and froze. The message read, "Do you see her?" The executive didn't reply, didn't turn around, just stared forward, suddenly rigid. Because responding would make it real. And some people would rather sit in silence than acknowledge that something unexpected is happening. Now let's shift to one side of the auditorium. Section B, row 5. A well-known actor arrived early and took their seat, flipping through the program. Nothing unusual. But when someone entered the aisle a minute later, the actor's posture changed immediately. Not shock. Recognition. Their eyes widened for just 1 second before their expression reset into polite neutrality. You know that look people get when they spot someone they didn't think would show up somewhere? Not surprise. Calculation. Because they were already deciding whether this appearance was intentional or intrusive. But here's the key detail. No one approached the unexpected attendee. No one greeted them. No one waved. No one whispered hello. They just watched. And watching can be far more powerful than speaking. People shifted in their seats, subtly turning their bodies away. Not enough to be obvious, but enough to signal distance. The energy inside the room wasn't hostile. It was unsettled. Confusion mixed with anticipation. Like everyone was waiting for a cue that hadn't been given yet. Now here's where timing becomes everything. At 5:11 p.m., the auditorium lights dimmed slightly as part of the pre-show transition. Normally, this would calm the room. On this night, it didn't. Because darkness gives people permission to observe without being observed. And that's when the whispers began. Not loud enough to carry. Just soft enough to spread. Is that really her? Did someone invite her? Why is she here? But no one said the name. Names give power. Names create certainty. And certainty wasn't something anyone wanted to take responsibility for. Backstage, the stage manager still believed the situation was contained. Inside the auditorium, it was already beyond containment. Because perception doesn't wait for confirmation. Now let's zoom in on one specific moment. Arguably the most telling moment of the entire night before security was ever called. A camera operator, positioned near the back of the room, adjusted their equipment and accidentally panned toward the unexpected attendee. The operator flinched, almost imperceptibly, then angled the camera away. Why? Not because they were told to. but because instinct warned them not to capture something that wasn't supposed to exist. That single hesitation said everything. Even without knowing the details, people sensed that filming the situation would ignite it. So everyone chose stillness instead. Stillness that felt louder than noise. Now, let's talk about the silent signals, the tiny, wordless exchanges that told the room something was escalating. A publicist tapped their client's arm twice, a subtle warning to stay quiet. A producer avoided eye contact with tablemates, afraid someone might ask for clarity. An assistant swallowed hard and pretended to look at the stage, even though nothing was happening there yet. These weren't active reactions. They were defensive reactions. When people don't know what's happening, they protect themselves first. And protection often looks like silence. But the silence didn't last long, because the first bold reaction came from someone no one expected. An older industry veteran seated near the aisle. This person didn't whisper, didn't signal, didn't hide their confusion. They turned their head fully and stared. Not aggressively, just openly. And that openness broke the room's unspoken rule. Because once one person looked directly, others followed. Soon, more heads turned. Not dramatically, but gradually, like a slow tilt of the room's collective attention. And here's the strange part. The unexpected attendee didn't react. Not to the glances. Not to the shifting energy. Not to the unspoken discomfort. They sat still, composed, eyes forward, as if nothing unusual was happening at all. That composure made the situation worse. Because people expect tension to come from the person causing the disruption, not from everyone else. But the stillness was unsettling. Stillness can feel like confidence. Stillness can feel like entitlement. Stillness can feel like waiting. And waiting suggested intention. Now let's move to the moment the atmosphere tightened beyond recovery. A member of the event's executive committee entered the auditorium through the side door. They scanned the room with the controlled calm of someone gathering data. Their gaze landed on the unexpected attendee. Their expression didn't change, but their body did. They pivoted on their heel and exited immediately. No hesitation, no greeting, no acknowledgement, just action. That is the moment several guests realized. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a problem. Because executives don't move unless something requires decision. And decisions at this level aren't gentle. They're decisive. Now here's something most people didn't notice. A security team member appeared at the back of the room shortly after. Not approaching, not engaging, just watching. Hands clasped, posture neutral, expression unreadable. Security watching someone who isn't doing anything is far more telling than security responding to someone causing a scene. It means the potential for escalation has been recognized, even if no action has occurred. Meanwhile, across the auditorium, a famous comedian whispered to the person beside them, "This is going to blow up." The person whispered back, "Only if someone makes a move." And that right there became the unspoken rule of the room. Do not move. Do not react. Do not acknowledge. Because acknowledgement turns speculation into story. Now let's zoom back out. Audiences at award shows aren't passive observers. They are curated participants. They know politics. They know hierarchy. They know what shouldn't be happening. So when something breaks the unwritten script, they feel it immediately. And at this point, the room wasn't just aware. It was bracing, not for drama, for consequences. The energy wasn't chaotic. It was controlled tension. Like everyone was sitting on the edge of something they couldn't yet see. And into that tension came the final, defining signal of this chapter. At 5:19 p.m., someone approached the unexpected attendee. Not security, not staff, not an executive, a fellow guest. They leaned down and spoke softly. The attendee responded. The guest straightened, eyes wide with a shock they tried to mask, then walked away quickly, almost too quickly. Whatever was said changed that person's understanding of the situation instantly, and that reaction spread faster than any whisper. People didn't need to hear the words. They saw the impact. In environments like this, reaction is louder than explanation. The attendee remained composed, still seated, still calm. But now, the room wasn't just watching. It was waiting. Waiting for confirmation. Waiting for removal. Waiting for the moment the host would learn what the audience already knew. Something had entered the building that didn't belong there, and it wasn't leaving on its own. But what happened next would transform quiet tension into unavoidable action. And no one in that room was prepared for what came next. The IT wasn't the entrance that triggered security. It wasn't the whispers. It wasn't the audience staring. It wasn't even the mounting tension backstage. The truth is much stranger than that. Security wasn't called because someone unexpected showed up. Security was called because of what happened next. And almost no one in the room understood the severity of it until it was too late. Let's rewind to the moment the executive committee member walked out of the auditorium. They didn't storm out. They didn't run. They didn't show panic. They walked with purpose. Purpose is more dangerous than panic. Panic reacts. Purpose decides. As soon as they reached the backstage corridor, they pulled out a radio and spoke into it quietly. "We need confirmation." 2 seconds later, the reply came through. "No confirmation on file." No confirmation. That phrase is the real trigger. Because in high-security award environments, everything relies on one principle. If it isn't verified, it doesn't exist. People don't get inside by charm, or by assumption, or by recognition. They get inside by clearance. No clearance means no access. No access means immediate intervention. In theory. But this night was not operating on theory. Because while the executive was requesting clarity, something else was happening at the far end of the backstage hallway. A staff member approached the unexpected attendee, not to escort, not to challenge, but to clarify. This staff member wasn't security. They weren't senior. They were simply doing what they believed was the right thing, trying to avoid escalation. They approached with a professional smile and asked the question that should have resolved everything. "Can I verify your credentials?" A simple request. Standard procedure. But the answer didn't resolve anything. The attendee replied calmly. "My team handled it." Handled. Past tense. That single word changed the tone. It suggested completion. It suggested authority. It suggested the situation was no longer up for discussion. But the staff member didn't back down. Not out of defiance. Out of responsibility. They tried again. "I just need to confirm access before we move forward." Silence. Not hostile. Not defensive. Just silence. The attendee didn't leave. Didn't argue. Didn't explain. They just stared forward, waiting. Waiting for what? No one knew. And waiting is a problem. Because waiting implies expectation. Expectation implies legitimacy. Legitimacy implies someone failed. That uncertainty created the first wave of internal panic. Not loud, but sharp. The staff member stepped away to radio their supervisor. And that's when the situation shifted from inconvenient to serious. While the staff member turned their back, the unexpected attendee moved. Not dramatically. Not aggressively, just a few steps forward, past the designated boundary line. Award events operate on invisible borders. Beyond this point, authorized personnel only. Restricted access. Crossing those boundaries doesn't require force. It only requires movement. And movement can be enough to trigger protocol. So when the attendee stepped beyond the checkpoint, calmly, confidently, without hesitation, it created instant alarm. Not because of who they were, but because of what that action meant. Crossing a restricted threshold without clearance is classified as a breach, and breaches demand response. Backstage staff froze. One production coordinator whispered urgently into their headset, "We've got movement." Security replied, "Hold position. Hold position. Not intervene. Not escort. Just watch." Because security at award shows isn't about aggression. It's about assessment. If someone is confused, you redirect. If someone is entitled, you stall. If someone is determined, you prepare. But no one expected what happened next. The attendee didn't stop at the restricted line. They continued down the hallway toward the backstage access point that leads directly to the wings of the stage. That area is sacred. Only presenters, scheduled nominees, and designated staff enter it. Anyone else risks interrupting live broadcast operations. A single wrong person in that space can destroy timing, ruin camera cues, or disrupt performers waiting to go on. So when the attendee crossed that threshold, the situation evolved instantly. The supervisor gave the first verbal directive of the night. Block the corridor. 2 staff members stepped into position, not aggressively, but firmly. They didn't touch the attendee. They simply created a physical boundary. One staffer spoke. "I'm sorry, this area is restricted." The attendee paused. Not startled, not apologetic, just still. Then came the sentence that triggered the escalation. "I'm supposed to speak with the hosts." That line changed everything. Hosts are not access points. Hosts are not part of guest management. Hosts do not approve entry. Hosts do not take unscheduled meetings, especially minutes before showtime. Claiming direct access to the hosts is a boundary violation in itself. Because if someone can bypass the chain of command by invoking a name, the entire security system collapses. So the staff member responded carefully. You'll need clearance for that. The attendee said nothing. They simply waited. Again, that waiting created pressure that pushed the situation to its breaking point. Let's pause here. Have you ever watched something unfold slowly, knowing that if someone doesn't intervene, it will explode? That's what backstage staff felt. They were trapped between policy and politeness. Denying access risked confrontation. Allowing access risked disaster. So they did the only thing they could in that moment. They stalled. But stalling only works if the other person accepts the delay. This person didn't. Without raising their voice. Without causing a scene. Without breaking composure. They attempted to move forward again. That was the exact moment someone made the call. Not Kelly. Not Mark. Not even the stage manager. It was a senior operations director who issued the instruction. Get security immediately. Not because someone was disruptive, but because someone attempted to bypass protocol. Security doesn't respond to drama. Security responds to rules being broken, and a breach had occurred. Now here's where the story gets even more complicated. As security moved into position, someone backstage attempted to intervene, not to support the staff, but to override them. A person stepped forward and said, "She has authorization." But when asked to provide documentation, they couldn't. Their claim couldn't be verified. Their authority couldn't be confirmed. Their involvement only deepened the confusion. Because now it wasn't just a breach. It was a contested breach. And contested breaches escalate faster than confirmed ones. Meanwhile, Kelly and Mark had no idea that security was already mobilizing. They still believed the situation was contained to whispers and uncertainty. But backstage wasn't whispering anymore. Security arrived quietly, uniforms muted, posture controlled, communication discreet. They positioned themselves at key access points. No confrontation, no raised voices, just presence. Presence that told the staff, this is no longer optional. But here is the most surprising part of the entire night. Security wasn't called to escort anyone out. They were called to prevent further access. There is a big difference. Escorting someone out implies removal. Blocking someone implies prevention. This wasn't about ejecting an unwanted guest. It was about stopping someone from reaching a place they weren't allowed to be. Security approached calmly. One spoke in a measured tone. We need to verify your clearance before you continue. Again, calm response. It's already been handled. Handled. The same word used earlier. Repeating it didn't strengthen the claim. It weakened it. Security remained still. We just need confirmation before moving forward. Then came the turning point. The attendee replied, I was told to wait backstage. That statement was more serious than anything said so far. Because if true, it meant someone inside the staff authorized access. If false, it meant the attendee was attempting to gain access by invoking false instruction. Either scenario required intervention. Security radioed the director. We need immediate verification on this claim. The response was nearly instant. No instruction was given. In security language, that is the equivalent of pulling a fire alarm. Because a false claim isn't just a misunderstanding. It's an active breach attempt. Now, let's be clear. The attendee still wasn't acting aggressively. They weren't arguing. They weren't raising their voice. They weren't attempting to push through. But their presence had crossed into a protected space. And security protocol is triggered by behavior, not emotion. So the guard gave the first restricted order directive of the night. You'll need to wait in the designated area. The attendee didn't comply. Not dramatically. Not rudely. They simply didn't move. Stillness at the wrong time is more dangerous than motion. Motion can be redirected. Stillness forces escalation. Security tried again. We can escort you to the holding area until verification is complete. Still no movement. Silence. That silence forced the decision. Security called for secondary clearance. Secondary clearance is not standard. Secondary clearance means prepare for removal. Not immediately. Not violently. But officially. Meanwhile, back on the stage, Kelly and Mark were about to receive their second and final warning of the night. A stage assistant rushed toward them with urgency that could no longer be disguised. Kelly saw the expression and knew instantly. This wasn't contained anymore. Mark leaned in. "What now?" The assistant answered with the words that shifted the night from uncertainty to action. "Security needs instruction. Security needs instruction. Not security is handling it. Not security resolved it. Security needs instruction." Which meant one thing. The problem was no longer procedural. It was now at the level where someone had to decide what happened next. And that someone was the host. Kelly stiffened. Mark's expression hardened. Because if security is asking for direction from the hosts, that means the situation has exceeded policy. And once something exceeds policy, it becomes personal responsibility. Kelly closed her eyes for a moment. Not in fear. In calculation. Because whatever decision she made now would have consequences. For the event. For the broadcast. For her reputation. Mark waited. The assistant waited. Security waited. And in that stretched-out silence, Kelly realized something. This wasn't about presence. It was about protocol. And protocol had been broken. But the decision she made next would change everything. And no one backstage was prepared for the fallout. Kelly Ripa is a professional. That much is obvious. She's faced on-air chaos, celebrity tantrums, and technical disasters for decades. And the cameras barely flinch when she steps on stage. But this night was different. Because nothing in her career had prepared her for what she was about to face. An unexpected intrusion into one of the most meticulously planned nights in television history. It began with that quiet whisper backstage. That simple notification from a junior assistant that instantly set her nerves on alert. At first, she didn't react. Not out loud, not visibly. She kept reviewing her lines, flipping through cue cards, adjusting her delivery as if the night were still normal. But inside, something was shifting. A subtle tightness in her shoulders. A flicker in her eyes that even the dim backstage lights couldn't hide. She had seen many emergencies in her life. Teleprompter failures, stage collapses, talent walking off set. But none carried this specific weight. This wasn't technical. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't even about a celebrity simply showing up unexpectedly. This was a calculated presence that threatened not just the flow of the broadcast, but the integrity of the event itself. Kelly's mind raced, analyzing. Who authorized this? Was it a misunderstanding? A publicity stunt? Or something more deliberate? She had to consider all possibilities, because in moments like this, a single wrong move could be catastrophic. Mark Consuelos noticed it first. The subtle shift in her composure, the tension behind her eyes. He leaned closer, careful not to disturb the rehearsals, and asked, quietly, "What's going on?" Kelly didn't answer immediately. Her silence spoke volumes. Not panic, not anger, just calculation. Because in live television, panic is visible. Decision is invisible until executed. And Kelly was calculating. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Crew members whispered to each other, and the backstage tension thickened, but Kelly's focus never wavered. She knew the moment she reacted incorrectly, the night could collapse entirely. And then came the breaking point. A stage manager appeared at her side, visibly shaken, and handed her a printed note. She unfolded it slowly, eyes scanning the words. Her expression didn't change outwardly, but inside, her pulse quickened. Security needs instruction. It was the phrase that shifted everything. Not handled, not resolved, not contained. Security needed direction. And the weight of responsibility now rested on Kelly's shoulders. Mark glanced at her. Her jaw was set, her lips pressed into a thin line. He knew that look. He had seen it in moments when she was about to make a decision that would define the entire situation. "Do we escalate?" he asked silently. Kelly's response was deliberate. Not yet. Her words were calm, almost too calm, but the room around her felt the tension anyway. She had seen what happens when hosts act without preparation. Public perception doesn't wait for context. Headlines are instant. Social media spreads misinterpretations faster than live cameras. And so she calculated. Not for herself, but for everyone. The crew, the performers, the audience, the integrity of the show. She walked slowly toward the side corridor, where the first encounter had occurred. Security had positioned themselves near the access point, calm but alert. The unexpected attendee stood with an air of quiet confidence. Not aggressive, not dismissive, just present. And presence alone can command a room more than any verbal confrontation ever could. Kelly approached carefully, measuring her words. Not too loud, not too soft. Not accusatory, not permissive. Just authority wrapped in calm. "Excuse me," she said, her voice controlled. "I need to verify your access."